Few topics in Catholic Church history carry as much weight, controversy, and ongoing debate as the Crusades. It's a subject often reduced to oversimplified narratives in both directions, so in this video, we're going to walk through what popes specifically called for, what actually happened once these campaigns got underway, and why the gap between papal intention and battlefield reality became one of the most consequential and debated aspects of medieval church history. Welcome to Pope Pulse. This continues our deep dive into Catholic Church history. This is a genuinely weighty topic, so we're going to approach it carefully and factually, without minimizing the real human cost involved. The First Crusade traces back to a specific speech delivered by Pope Urban II in November of 1095, at a church council held in the French city of Clermont. Urban's call was prompted by a request for military assistance from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I, whose territory in the eastern Mediterranean was facing significant pressure from Seljuk Turkish forces, along with broader, long-standing concerns among European Christians about the treatment of Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem and other significant sites, which had come under Muslim political control centuries earlier. Urban's speech at Clermont called specifically for European Christians to take up arms and travel to the eastern Mediterranean, framed explicitly as a religious undertaking rather than a purely political or military one. Contemporary accounts describe the call being met with immediate, enthusiastic response, with crowds reportedly responding with chants that later became closely associated with crusading more broadly. Urban specifically offered spiritual incentives to those who participated, including the promise of what came to be understood as an indulgence, meaning a formal reduction of temporal punishment for sin, tied specifically to participation in this particular undertaking. It's genuinely important to distinguish between Urban's original stated goals and what actually unfolded once large, often poorly organized and poorly disciplined groups of participants actually began moving toward the eastern Mediterranean. Urban's stated aims centered specifically on providing military assistance to Byzantine Christians facing genuine external military pressure, and on securing safer access to Christian pilgrimage sites in the region, particularly Jerusalem itself. He did not call for, and multiple historical accounts do not credit him with ordering indiscriminate violence against civilian populations, forced conversion, or the kind of large-scale atrocities that would later occur at multiple points during the actual military campaigns that followed his call. What followed, however, diverged substantially from this original, relatively narrow religious and military framing. The First Crusade's actual military campaign included documented instances of serious violence against civilian populations, including Jewish communities in parts of Europe who faced violent attacks from crusading groups passing through on their way toward the eastern Mediterranean, entirely separate from and unrelated to the campaign's stated original objectives. The eventual capture of Jerusalem in 1099 was accompanied by a documented massacre of a significant portion of the city's population, an event that historians across a wide range of perspectives generally regard as a genuinely severe atrocity, considerably beyond anything that could reasonably be attributed to Urban's original stated call at Clermont 4 years earlier. The First Crusade wasn't a single, isolated event. It was followed by numerous subsequent crusading campaigns across the following 2 centuries, called by various successive popes for a range of overlapping religious, political, and territorial reasons, with genuinely mixed and inconsistent results. As these later campaigns unfolded, some popes expressed genuine, documented concern about specific abuses and excesses committed by crusading forces, even while continuing to support the broader crusading project in principle. Pope Innocent III, for instance, whom we'll likely cover in more depth in a future biography video given his broader historical significance, explicitly condemned the notorious 1204 sack of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade, an event where crusading forces, in a significant and controversial departure from the Crusade's original stated target, instead attacked and thoroughly sacked a major Christian city, one that was itself a center of Eastern Orthodox Christianity rather than the intended target of the campaign. This particular episode is generally regarded by historians as one of the most damaging individual events in the broader history of relations between Western Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Christianity, contributing significantly to a lasting mutual distrust between the 2 branches of the faith that persisted for centuries afterward, and which some historians argue continues to shape relations between the 2 traditions even today. This is really the central, genuinely complicated question underlying this entire topic, and it's worth addressing directly rather than dodging it. To what extent should popes calling for these campaigns be held directly responsible for the atrocities that occurred during them? Historians generally distinguish between direct papal instruction, meaning specific violent acts explicitly ordered or requested by a pope, and outcomes that emerged from a combination of medieval warfare's inherent brutality, poor command discipline over large, often loosely organized crusading forces and genuine mission creep, where campaigns that began with relatively narrow, stated religious and military objectives gradually expanded into broader territorial conquest, plunder, and, in cases like the sack of Constantinople, attacks on entirely different targets than originally intended. This distinction matters for historical accuracy, but it doesn't fully absolve the papacy of responsibility either. Popes who called for these campaigns bore real responsibility for setting in motion large-scale, church-endorsed military undertakings whose ultimate consequences repeatedly proved difficult, and at multiple points entirely impossible, to control once actually underway. Several popes throughout the broader crusading era did express genuine after-the-fact concern, and sometimes explicit condemnation, regarding specific excesses, but this generally came after the fact rather than through effective advance prevention, reflecting the genuine practical limits of centralized medieval papal authority over forces operating at such considerable geographic distance, often for years at a time. It's worth placing the Crusades within their broader medieval context, without using that context to excuse specific documented atrocities, but rather to understand more accurately why these campaigns took the particular shape they did. Medieval warfare generally, regardless of the specific religious or political motivation behind any particular conflict, was characterized by considerably less centralized command discipline, considerably less reliable long-distance communication, and considerably higher tolerance for civilian harm compared to modern military norms and international law. This broader context helps explain, though again, does not excuse, why campaigns launched with a specific stated religious purpose could diverge so substantially from that original purpose once large armies were actually assembled and set into motion across considerable distances and extended timeframes. It's also worth noting that the Crusades collectively encompass a genuinely wide range of distinct campaigns across roughly 2 centuries, with meaningfully different specific goals, outcomes, and levels of papal involvement and oversight. Treating the entire multi-century crusading era as a single, uniform historical event tends to flatten genuinely important distinctions between, for instance, the First Crusade's original stated defensive and pilgrimage access goals, and later campaigns that increasingly incorporated more explicitly territorial, political, and even, in certain specific and controversial cases, intra-Christian objectives entirely disconnected from the original stated purpose. In more recent decades, various church leaders, including several modern popes, have engaged directly and publicly with this difficult historical legacy, in ways that reflect a genuinely different institutional posture toward this history compared to how it was generally discussed in earlier centuries. Pope John Paul II, for instance, made a series of formal apologies during a broad Jubilee Year observance in 2000, addressing various historical wrongs committed by Catholics throughout church history, including instances of religiously motivated violence, without singling out the Crusades by name specifically in every instance, but generally understood as encompassing this broader historical legacy among the various wrongs being acknowledged. This reflects a broader pattern we've actually touched on elsewhere on this channel, regarding modern popes engaging directly and publicly with genuinely difficult historical chapters, rather than simply avoiding the topic entirely. This kind of direct historical engagement doesn't erase or rewrite what actually happened during these campaigns, but it does reflect a meaningfully different institutional relationship with this specific difficult history compared to earlier centuries, when this same history was frequently framed in considerably more triumphant, uncritical terms within official church commentary and popular Catholic memory alike. So the honest answer to what did the Pope actually order is genuinely more complicated than either a simple defense or a simple condemnation can fully capture. Real religious and military objectives, real spiritual incentives offered to participants, and real, documented atrocities that frequently exceeded, and at points entirely departed from, what any single pope had originally called for or could have realistically controlled once these campaigns were actually underway across considerable distances and extended time frames. If you're finding this deeper dive into Catholic Church history valuable, subscribe to Pope Pulse for more, and let me know in the comments, are there other genuinely difficult chapters in church history you'd like us to cover with this same kind of careful, factual approach?